Today's industry recap is certainly a contrast between two different airlines in two very different positions. One is on Emirates, the other on Lufthansa. Why not begin with the positive first, where Emirates has announced that the launch of its Airbus A350 on officially scheduled passenger services will occur earlier than initially expected. From the 3rd of January 2025, the carrier will deploy its newly delivered A350 on service to Edinburgh from Dubai International Airport, its home. Initially, per previously unveiled scheduling, the A350 was expected to debut in Edinburgh towards the middle of January. We were quoted at the date of the 15th. EK23 will depart Dubai at 2:50 p.m. with a 7:05 p.m. arrival into Edinburgh, the times local to their respective city. The returning aircraft will depart as EK24 at 8:40 p.m. before arriving back into Dubai the following morning at 8:05. The delivery of the first A350 to make this Edinburgh service possible is still considerably later than what was initially hoped. Emirates believed the aircraft would arrive in August for a formal entry into service later that month and into early September. Complications, though, when taking delivery of the plane, spurred on by supply chain issues at Airbus, forced Emirates to delay the entry into service. Worse still, those delays have been quite substantial, and we're talking about an airline that wasn't forced to, say, push back the EIS and launch cities once, but rather multiple times in a means to cope with all of this. However, thankfully, the first aircraft has now been delivered, and a major ceremony was unveiled to celebrate the arrival of the first fleet type, with people attending from right around the world. And remember, this is the first new fleet type since the late 2000s, so it certainly does mark a new era for the operator, and it's something they'll have to get used to once again. The airline's fleet portfolio was actually a lot more complex. The A350, however, will give Emirates greater flexibility across their route network, and this is arguably something that they've felt has been missing, given their large reliance on just two series, that being the 777 and the A380. While these planes are fantastic and they do offer the company higher capacity, they do also come with their downsides. Emirates considers the upcoming A350 to be not just modern, but also an efficient alternative for markets that may, say, require regional travel into international markets. It will enable connectivity to cities that also require service, but are not able to accommodate something like the A380. Furthermore, the aircraft is expected to free up existing planes that will then be able to be deployed to, say, cities elsewhere on the network that maybe A, are not featured, or even consider the possibility that there are cities that require additional flights due to capacity demands. The A350 joining the network can free up some of your larger planes to operate on those routes that are high in demand. Over to the next story, and certainly something a little bit on the opposite side, is German flag carrier Lufthansa, that has once more discussed the supply chain difficulties impacting its business in a new interview that was aired on CNN. In alarming comments from the group's CEO, there were concerns that the supply chain issues I speak so frequently of, that have also been rampaging through our beloved industry, are taking no prisoners and are expected to continue for years. In fact, Lufthansa firmly believes that supply chain issues will scarily persist until at least the end of the decade, and while maybe on a public front it won't look like they're still occurring, those underlying supply chain problems are expected to stick around. Worse still, the only problem the airline believes it doesn't have is demand, this being an incredibly strong part that continues to grow, and according to the airline's executive, really does show the strengths that the industry has, but actually meeting all this available demand is the real challenge. All these challenges stem from frustrations with engines, aircraft, and so much more, and a lot of unknown as well that makes forecasting very difficult. Other concerns that remain are the political unrest seen in Germany, which was mentioned in the interview, which has seen the primary German flag carrier look to develop its network away from solely this country, but obviously its importance on a domestic front can't be ignored. Despite this, the group has pointed towards some positives, including the upcoming acquisition of ITA Airways, which will see daily flights into New York JFK jump quite considerably. This location is considered to be the most premium market in the world, so they're excited about adding more daily flights here thanks to ITA. The US remains a hot area of focus as well, with the continued development of the network here for all the Lufthansa Group airlines. It's a huge part of the structure moving forward. All that being said, and while the group can continue developing its own network in this region, it is also more than aware that a partnership with United Airlines, a fellow Star Alliance member, is really a fundamental backbone of why its operation throughout the country has been so successful. And this is something it says it absolutely will not be taking for granted and couldn't speak highly enough of it. So as for the supply chain difficulties, what is the major thing that has been talked about so frequently over the last few years? I'd point towards aircraft problems. Analysts and airline executives have heavily documented Lufthansa's problems related to acquiring those new next-generation aircraft. Funny, isn't it? We're talking planes that were meant to come in to change the airline for the better, but if anything, ignoring what they'll actually bring once flying, it's been nothing short of problematic. Let's head back though. During the height of the pandemic, Lufthansa, like many other international companies, knew it had to make significant changes to its business to ensure it could navigate the turbulent times. And in this case, it saw it axe key large aircraft to cope with the loss in capacity and also lower operating costs. Many of these decisions that I speak of were also made with a view that when the pandemic restrictions eased, new aircraft would begin entering service, making the retirements worthwhile, and they weren't the only airline that thought something similar of this. However, none of this panned out as intended for Lufthansa, with the retirements ended up being one of the many things that went wrong over the last 5 years. You see, when demand returned, Lufthansa had retired much of its high-capacity aircraft, but the problem was now related to the expectation of new planes coming in. Supply chains, because of the global pandemic, were absolutely decimated, and aircraft manufacturers were very quickly unable to deliver the planes that Lufthansa required on time. This a huge contributing factor to why the company felt like it was struggling to meet the demand that was rapidly returning. If you recall, in and around the early 2020s, there were some analysts expecting demand to not return to pre-COVID rates until 2025 and 2026. That obviously couldn't be on a generalized basis further from the truth. In fact, it probably came back far quicker than most would have expected. And as a result, Lufthansa had a lack of capacity and was forced to bring back older, less efficient aircraft. While the company should definitely be grateful that it actually was even able to bring some aircraft back in the short term, this was far from an optimal move and not the direction it wanted to head. If anything, maybe it felt it was moving backwards again. By returning these older aircraft to service, maintenance costs and operating costs were going to rise, but it was the only means to try and mitigate some of the supply chain impacts. Now, the company has stated it's lost hundreds of millions, and frustrations are increasingly growing as new aircraft are not just delayed because of supply chain problems, but even just simply because they can't be certified. That'll conclude today's aviation recap on two very different kinds of airlines, one entering a new era with the delivery of a new plane, and one talking about all the frustrations it has with the current operating environment. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Thanks a bunch for watching, take care, be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow for your next industry recap.
And we'll fly.